November 29th, 1981. Catalina Island, California. Somewhere in the dark water off the coast of that island, America's sweetheart was gone. She had been afraid of dark water her entire life, terrified of it in a way that people who loved her described as almost prophetic. She had built her entire existence around staying close to the edge of things, but never falling in. And then she fell in. But this story is not just about Natalie Wood. Back at the hotel suite on the mainland, two little girls were asleep. One was 11. One was 7. Natasha, dark-haired like her mother, already old enough to recognize beauty when she saw it, and Courtney, still small enough to believe that beautiful things were permanent. Neither girl knew yet. Neither girl could know yet that the phone call that was coming in a few hours would not just end their childhood. It would set them both on separate, painful, decades-long journeys through grief, identity, and the impossible task of becoming whole people in the shadow of an absence that the whole world was watching. This is the story of what happened to them. Quick pause before we get into the architecture of this empire. This channel runs on obsessive research and zero corporate backing. Just the work. We are pushing for 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month, and we are not there yet. If this story already has you leaning forward, hit subscribe. Be one of the originals, the ones who were here before this blew up. One click. Drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. Chapter 1, The Shadowed Backstory. To understand what Natalie Wood's death did to her daughters, you first have to understand what Natalie Wood's life had already done to them. Natalie Wood was not born Natalie Wood. She was born Natasha Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938 in San Francisco to Russian immigrant parents carrying their own tightly wound anxieties about survival, fate, and the cruelty of the world. Her mother, Maria, was a woman of sharp ambitions and sharper superstitions. She believed in omens. She believed in prophecy. She believed, specifically, that dark water held death for her daughter. A belief reportedly rooted in a fortune-teller's warning she had received long before Natasha was born. Maria passed that fear along. She folded it into Natalie from childhood, quietly and persistently, the way you press something fragile between the pages of a book. The irony is that Maria also pushed Natalie directly toward Hollywood, which pushed Natalie directly toward a life of yachts and coastal parties and ocean weekends. Near the water, always. In the water, never. Natalie grew up as a child star under conditions that would be unrecognizable today. Unrelenting pressure, no separation between her identity and her performance. A mother who managed her career with the intensity of someone who believed her daughter's stardom was destiny. She was extraordinary. She was also, from a very young age, being shaped into someone who lived in performance. That shaping had consequences. Natalie struggled through her 20s. A difficult first marriage to Robert Wagner, a turbulent period of depression and personal crisis, and a gradual, hard-won rebuilding of herself. She remarried Richard Gregson. She had Natasha in 1970. She divorced. She remarried Robert Wagner in 1972. She had Courtney in 1974. By the late 1970s, those who knew Natalie Wood well described someone who had finally found a kind of peace. A woman who wanted, more than anything, to be a good mother. Who drove her daughters to school. Who read to them at night. Who was, by all accounts, present and warm and fiercely devoted. She was trying, in other words, to give her children everything her own childhood had withheld. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where Maria's warnings still lived, there was still the dark water. Waiting. The Splendor yacht, the weekend trip, the November night, all of it still ahead. Chapter 2, The Golden Era/Contrast. There is a specific kind of grief that comes not from losing something broken, but from losing something whole. And in the years just before November 1981, Natalie Wood's household was, by nearly every account, whole. Friends who visited the Wagner family home in the years between Natalie's second marriage and her death described something that felt almost deliberately idyllic. Natalie cooked. She gardened. She took Natasha and Courtney to Disneyland. She was the kind of mother who showed up, who was visibly happy to show up, who had consciously chosen motherhood over the relentless professional grind that had defined her earlier years. Robert Wagner, known to the family as RJ, was a warm and involved stepfather. Courtney was biologically his. Natasha, from the Gregson marriage, was nonetheless embedded in the family in the full sense. Not a half-presence, not a guest, but a daughter. The girls themselves were, by all reports, luminous. Natasha at 11 was bright, perceptive, already showing the kind of emotional sensitivity that would mark her adult life. Courtney at 7 was ebullient and fearless, the kind of small child who fills a room without trying to. They had a mother they adored. They had a home that felt safe. They had a life that, from the outside, looked like the reward for all of Natalie's suffering. Proof that the hard years had been worth it. That is the photograph this story asks you to hold in your mind. Not the headlines. Not the theories. Not the investigation. The photograph of a mother reading to 2 girls before bed on a Thursday night, not knowing that the weekend that would end her life, and reshape theirs forever, was already 4 days away. Chapter 3. The Tragic Turn. The Thanksgiving weekend of 1981 began simply enough. Natalie and Robert Wagner boarded their yacht, the Splendor, accompanied by actor Christopher Walken, who had been filming a movie with Natalie. It was a trip to Catalina Island, a regular getaway, the kind of weekend they had done before. The girls were not on the boat. They were home with the housekeeper, in the familiar safety of their own beds. That detail matters. Natasha was 11 years old that weekend. She was old enough to understand, in the abstract, that parents sometimes went away on the boat without the children. It was not unusual. It was not alarming. It was just a weekend. Courtney was 7. 7 is old enough to know that your mother left and is expected back. 7 is not old enough to carry what happens when she doesn't come back. The night of November 28th, something went wrong. The exact events of that night have been debated, investigated, reopened, and contested for over 4 decades. What is not contested is this. At some point in the early hours of November 29th, Natalie would went into the dark water. She was found the next morning, some distance from the yacht. She was 43 years old. The coroner's initial ruling was accidental drowning. Decades later, the case would be reopened. A witness account would surface. The death certificate would be amended to include undetermined factors. Robert Wagner would be named a person of interest. The mystery would grow larger, louder, and more public with every passing year. But none of that, not a single piece of it, is what this story is about. This story is about what happened when the phone rang at the Wagner house the morning of November 29th. This story is about a housekeeper who had to find words. About a household that had been warm and whole 12 hours earlier and was now something else entirely. About a girl who was 11 and had just lost her mother, and a girl who was 7 and had just lost hers. Natasha Gregson Wagner has spoken about that morning in interviews over the years. She remembers being told carefully, in the way that adults try to soften the unsoftenable. She remembers understanding, in the way that 11-year-olds understand, with the full weight of the word and without any framework to hold it. Courtney Wagner was 7. She has said, in her own way, that she didn't fully understand for a long time what gone actually meant. She would spend much of her adult life learning. Chapter 4. The First Fallout. Natasha. Natasha Gregson Wagner grew up carrying her mother's name inside her own. Literally. Natalie had named her daughter Natasha, the Russian diminutive of her own birth name, Natasha Nikolaevna. It was an act of love and continuity, the passing of something precious from one generation to the next. It was also, in the years after November 1981, a weight that Natasha would have to learn how to wear. She was 11 when her mother died. Old enough to have real memories, specific ones, sensory ones. Old enough to remember what her mother smelled like, what her voice sounded like reading aloud, what her face looked like when she laughed. Old enough, too, to be aware of what Natalie would meant to the world outside their home. Old enough to watch the world grieve someone she had simply known as mom. The grief of a public person's child is a particular kind of grief. It does not get to be private. It gets refracted through media coverage, through strangers' opinions, through documentaries and retrospectives and magazines that appear in waiting rooms decades later, still carrying your mother's face on the cover. Natasha navigated it with a quietness that people who knew her as a young woman describe as deeply internal. She acted, eventually, following the family profession almost inevitably, but she carried the weight visibly. She gave interviews over the years that were careful, measured, and unmistakably shaped by loss. And then the case was reopened. In 2011, 30 years after Natalie's death, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation. A witness, the boat's captain, came forward with a new account. In 2018, Robert Wagner was formally named a person of interest. The story that Natasha had spent decades trying to move forward from was suddenly, loudly, everywhere again. She responded publicly. She defended her stepfather. She pushed back against the reopened investigation in terms that were clearly personal. The plea of someone who needed the story to be over. Not because she didn't want the truth, but because the endless public excavation of that night was its own form of damage. Natasha Gregson Wagner has never fully escaped November 29, 1981. She was 11 years old. She had done nothing. She had been asleep in her own bed. That is the part that doesn't fit anywhere. Chapter 5, The Second Fallout, Courtney. Courtney Wagner was 7 years old when her mother died. 7 is its own particular kind of terrible. At 7, you are old enough to know that something irreversible has happened. You understand the word gone. You understand, at a basic level, that the person who tucked you in will not be doing it again. You feel the temperature change in the house. You feel the way adults start looking at you differently, with that specific softness that is the face of people who don't know what to say. At 7, you are not old enough to process any of it. You are not old enough to place it inside a framework, to give it context, to understand what you are actually losing in all of its dimensions. Those dimensions reveal themselves slowly, over years. Over decades. Courtney Wagner, who took her father's name, Robert Wagner, as her own, has spoken about her childhood and her relationship to her mother's death in ways that reveal precisely this slow unfolding. The grief, for her, was not a single moment of devastation. It was a long, ongoing education in what it meant to grow up without a mother. There is a specific experience that belongs only to the children who lose a parent very young. Every milestone arrives with an absence at the center of it. Every graduation, every relationship, every accomplishment, there is a shape missing from the audience. Courtney Wagner grew up, fell in love, built a life, and did all of it in the permanent company of that missing shape. What complicates Courtney's journey in a way that is specific to her is that her father is Robert Wagner. The same Robert Wagner who has been named a person of interest in the death of her mother. Whatever Courtney knows or believes about that night on the Splendor, she has had to hold it in proximity to her relationship with the man who raised her after it. That is not a position any 7-year-old should be placed in. It is not a position any adult should have to navigate. Courtney has moved through it with a dignity that is its own kind of testimony. She was 7. She had done nothing. She was asleep in her own bed on a November night when the world she knew ended. That has never changed. Chapter 6, The Unresolved Climax. November 29th, 1981. Catalina Island, California. We are back where we started. The dark water. The yacht. The woman who had been afraid of exactly this her entire life. The mystery of what happened on the Splendor that night may never be conclusively resolved. That is the nature of it now. Too many years, too many layers of investigation and counter-investigation, too much noise. People will continue to debate it. Documentaries will continue to be made. The case file will continue to exist. None of that gives Natasha or Courtney their mother back. That is the sentence that matters. The tragedy of Natalie Wood is not an unsolved mystery. The tragedy is the mother who was loved by 2 little girls, who had rebuilt herself from a difficult past into something genuinely warm, who drove her daughters to school and read to them at night, and was, by every account, finally solidly present, and who was gone from the world at 43 on a November night, in the dark water she had been afraid of since before she could read. The tragedy is the girl who was 11 and had to watch the entire world perform grief over someone she had simply known as mom. The tragedy is the girl who was 7 and spent the next several decades slowly learning all the ways you can lose a person. Not just once on a single terrible morning, but again and again at every milestone that arrives with a shape missing. Natasha Gregson Wagner is in her 50s now. Courtney Wagner is in her late 40s. They are, by the accounts available, women who have built full lives. Women who have survived something that would have bent others permanently. But there are still 2 girls in this story who were asleep in their beds on the night of November 28, 1981, who had done nothing, who had no part in any of it. One was 11. One was 7. And when the phone rang the next morning, there was nothing anyone could do for either of them. That is what this story is actually about. More stories like this are coming. Stories about empires built on principles that everyone said were wrong and that turned out to be the only things that were right. Be here for them. Subscribe, comment, and I will see you on the next one.